All right, we were leaving off with the invisible people in the 1950s, right? We talked about 1 in 4 are invisible because of poverty, because of commuting, because of inexpensive clothing, because elderly people seldom stayed home or seldom left home, and the poor wielded no political power. This made it easy for others to ignore them. From 1945 to 1950, about 5 million African Americans left the South for northern cities. By 1955, nearly 700,000 Puerto Ricans migrated to the mainland. Remember, Puerto Rico is part of the United States, it's a Commonwealth nation. Mostly, these Puerto Ricans moved to New York City. In the West, large numbers of Mexican immigrants moved to Los Angeles and other cities. Housing discrimination limited where the minorities could live and work. Black and Latino populations became concentrated in decaying inner city areas that were being abandoned by whites. Remember, they're moving to the suburbs. These blighted neighborhoods turned into overcrowded slums with high rates of poverty and unemployment. To rectify this problem, Congress passed the Housing Act of 1949, a law passed to create public housing and urban renewal programs in order to help Americans live in decent conditions. Its goal was to provide a decent home for every American family, funding public housing and urban renewal, the redevelopment of impoverished urban areas by demolishing or renovating existing buildings and constructing new ones, improving transportation systems, and combating crime. Under urban renewal, the government demolished many slums and replaced them with high-rise apartments, offices, and civic buildings. Despite its lofty-sounding goal, however, the Housing Act of 1949 made urban poverty worse. American farmers also faced poverty. After World War II, a new agricultural technology contributed to the growth of agribusiness. This is like big business in farming. They're not just farming, 10 acres or 30 acres. They're farming 1,000 acres. Part of the nation's economy in which agricultural products are produced on a huge farm, generally run by a large corporation or wealthy individuals. Small farmers could not compete with the giant corporate farms, and many sank into poverty. Appalachia, a mountainous region in the southeast, runs along the Appalachian Mountains that go from Maine all the way down to Florida, the United States, was another rural outpost of poverty. Because the steep terrain there, living off the land by farming was difficult. Coal mining, the region's once dominant industry, declined after World War II as the demand for coal fell. The increase in demand and mechanization of mining led to job losses for miners. In the 1950s, more than 2 million impoverished people left Appalachia. Harrington described those who remain as beaten people, sunk in their poverty and deprived of hope. Perhaps the poorest U.S. citizens were Native Americans. In 1953, Congress voted to terminate the government's responsibility for Native Americans. The termination policy ended federal aid to tribes. It withdrew federal land protection, and it distributed tribal land among individuals. The voluntary relocation program encouraged Native Americans to move to cities. It provided transportation and initial help with finding housing and a job. By 1960, about 30% of Native Americans lived in urban areas. However, many who relocated struggled to adapt to city life. More than 100 Indian tribes and bands were eventually terminated. Without economic aid, and their poverty grew worse. Destitute tribes were forced to sell their land, resulting in the loss of more than 1 million acres of land. Termination eventually proved to be a failure, and in 1963, the policy was abandoned. All right, those are your 50s notes. I don't know how to stop.